secret that I don't like the media. Now, there are always exceptions. There are still some decent publications and still some decent journalists, even if their editors don't always let them say what needs to be said. But if I could for a moment speak to the journalists who routinely portray myself, Sharia Watch, and especially Pegida as far right, I'd like to explain to you the extent of the lie that you're telling and what the consequences of that lie can and will be. You are persuading people, in calling Pegida far right, you are persuading people that their enemy is their friend and their friend is their enemy. So I've got a suggestion for you. The next time you write about Pegida, put in a bit more detail and tell people what it is that we are opposing and what it is that we actually stand for, and then let them make up their own minds about whether or not we're far right. We are a peaceful movement of people that seek to preserve the liberties of Europe. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly. We reject Islam because it opposes freedom of speech in particular. When you talk about Islam and liberty in Europe, say a little bit about, for example, that in almost every Muslim country in the world, blasphemy is a criminal offence, and in several of them, blasphemy carries a death penalty. Tell your readers about the cartoonists and the bloggers and the satirists languishing in awful conditions in prisons across the Muslim world because of things they've said. And tell them also that this tiny minority of extremist fantasy is one of the biggest lies of all. Vast numbers of Muslims totally reject freedom of speech. A few years ago we found out that 78% of British Muslims thought that those who caricatured Muhammad should face criminal charges. And when you've told them all that, tell them that I, Sharia Watch, Pegida, oppose this erosion of free speech that has been occurring in our continent over the last couple of decades. As the influence of Islam has grown in Europe, we have politicians on the run for their lives, we have filmmakers murdered in the streets, we have machine gun fire at free speech events in Copenhagen, and we have, of course, the bloody, cold-blooded slaughter of cartoonists on the streets of Paris. Tell your readers what side of the free speech debate Pegida is on. Tell them that we are defending our liberties and our freedoms. And while you're at it, and this one's particularly for the Guardian journalists, why don't you tell the affluent gay couple in West London just what cuddly community leaders in this country would have in store for them if they had their way? You know, like Tommy Robinson did when he got an imam live on air to admit that in his ideal society, gay men would be executed. Now, you're perfectly happy to prod and poke at Pegida in the media, so why don't you prod and poke at these community leaders? And when you force them to admit that actually in their ideal society gays would be executed, put that in The Guardian. Let the affluent gay couple in West London read about that. And when you've told them about that, tell them that I, Sharia Watch, Pegida, Tommy Robinson and the rest of us on this movement, that we oppose this persecution and certainly execution of gay men. We are speaking out in defence of gay rights, and that really doesn't sound very far right to me. When you're done with that, you can write a few words for women and tell them what Islam would have in store for them if it ever had its way. Tell them that under Islam and across the Muslim society, women and girls are forced into marriages that they have no right or ability to get out of. This is the case regardless of whether they are being beaten or abused. You can also tell women that across the Muslim world, prisons are filled with women who have been jailed for being victims of rape or who have been jailed for running away from violent marriages. Tell them also that vast numbers of Muslim men are raised to believe that they have every right to treat women however they like, and that vast numbers of Muslim men believe that a woman who's not covered from head to toe is asking to be raped. Tell them about this, and tell them that the thousands of men pouring in to Europe every single day are coming from societies where women are treated appallingly, and they are bringing with them ideas that will erode our freedoms, that will turn back the clock, and that will plunge women into another dark age. And when you've told them that, tell them that I, Tommy Robinson, Paul Weston, Pegida, and the rest of us in this movement oppose this oppression of women. Tell women who the real threat to them is, and then tell them who is opposing that threat. When you're finished bleating about the poor oppressed Muslims whose every predicament is obviously somebody else's fault, why not spare a few moments to speak to Europe's Jews? Perhaps you ought to tell Jews about the explosion in violent anti-Semitism that's happened across Europe, coinciding, of course, with mass Muslim immigration. Tell them about the Jews in Germany and in Sweden who are afraid to publicly identify themselves as Jews because they're afraid of attacks by Muslim gangs. Tell them about the number of Jews leaving Europe, fleeing for Israel. And tell them why Jews are leaving Europe and fleeing for Israel. Tell them that the tens of thousands of men who are pouring into Europe every single day are coming from societies steeped in anti-Semitism, and that they are bringing that anti-Semitism with them, and they will make Europe far, far less safe for Jews. When you've told them all that, tell them that Pegida, I, Sharia Watch, Tommy Robinson, Paul Weston, and the rest of us in this movement oppose this anti-Semitism. We want Europe to be a safe place for Jews. That's why we don't want thousands more anti-Semites to come live here. Defending the rights and safety of Jews is not far right. It is democratic and libertarian, and it's that Pegida stands for. In telling people that Pegida is far right, what do you expect to happen? How can you expect women, Jews and gays to get behind a movement when you continue to call it far right? They won't. And in doing this, in calling us far right, in persuading people that we are the enemy and that this mass migration is a refuge for the oppressed, you're persuading women, gays and Jews to support their own demise. You're inviting them and encouraging them to make Europe a far, far less safe place. And you're doing it because your virtue signalling is far more important to you than the freedoms, safety and rights of European women, gays and Jews. You are distorting reality, and you are creating a great, great danger for people today and tomorrow across this continent. That is quite a mark that you are making. Congratulations to you all.